you said that trans people or trans ideology, by the way, you said ideology, not trans
Yes.
advocacy, is damaging human rights, intentionally incoherent, and designed to appeal to the delusional. And after about 30 minutes of grinding those statements down, we've arrived at you think that trans people, or that people in general, when they see transphobia online,
So not trans
should,
people, people that promote
yeah, trans,
a
yeah,
specific part of trans ideology,
right,
which
people who
would
promote,
be the ideology side. We want to call everyone transphobic if they don't
that's not a part of
accept
trans
our new
ideology.
definition without us telling them what our new definition is or promoting our new definition in any way, shape, or form.
Right, so, yeah, everyone who isn't a transphobe would agree with that. So you're saying then all those statements got ground down into, I think that you should lay out like an academic dissertation on the meaning of change definitions and ask what their definition is before getting started. Oh, again,
No,
nobody does this with
again,
race.
that's a ludicrous straw man.
What about people who
Like,
today think that like descendants of the Aryan bloodline have a God-given right to conquer the planet, and that other inferior races are just are just sort of like stock, like they're sort of the background characters to the Aryan race. Now that is a coherent and internally consistent racial ideology. If I see a person posting Nazi shit on Twitter, do I have to step in and say, well, just so you know, I use a different definition of race than you. From my perspective, I think race is a social construct, not a
so
God-given set of
okay then.
like this is ridiculous. We don't do this for
How
anything
many
else.
dictionaries say that is the way of defining social order, that the Aryan race is better than everyone else?
Depends.
Um,
Wait, depends. 80 years ago in
I,
Germany? What do you think?
what, in Germany right now?
80 years
Or
ago in
sorry,
Germany, I bet
80
you
years in
the
Germany? Quite
dictionaries would have.
possibly.
Yeah. So in a society with a very
But
bigoted preset racial understanding, I would not have expected like Jews, socialists, and Slavs back then, when talking with Nazis in like Poland, to go like, oh yeah, I've got a different understanding of race. What definition are you using? Oh, you think that Aryans are designed to conquer the world. Okay. Well, I believe, and I think there's more social utility in the idea that races are largely arbitrary but equal. So you using language such as Untermensch is coming off kind of problematic to me. I think that you would be better suited by adopting my ideology. Is that okay? Like, nobody does this, you know?
oh yeah, because that's a absolutely ludicrous straw man, and you know it
Everything I
is.
say is a straw man to you.
Well, that's because you keep making like ludicrous. I
Maybe
mean
you just
that
don't like,
analogy is
it just seems like
well,
you don't
because
like the
again,
natural
that
conclusions of the
definition of
arguments you're
Aryan
making.
exists to exclude non-Aryans.
The intentionality of the terminology is largely irrelevant here.
Well,
And
actually, I would argue how the terminology came about
by the way,
is
the
does
exclusion
matter.
of non-binary people
We've
has been
seen that with lots of words.
the exclusion of
Um,
non-binary people has been going on for millennia. You realize that, right? Like gender
yeah,
non-conforming people were heavily punished in Western society. Christians and Catholics would kill them, would socially ostracize them. They would light them to pyre. The language that we use today, the binary language, is different from the language used in, say, India or Taiwan. Sorry, Thailand, I think, because those cultures have historically been more forgiving towards and more interested in the lives of people who aren't part of the gender binary. But here in the West, our modern day language and the definition of gender you're defending are the historical product of a pretty deliberate effort to decide what types of behavior are and aren't acceptable. So if you want to go to original intent, I don't know who invented the 2,000-year-old definition of gender, but I do know that its origins and its development are heavily, heavily rooted in an effort to prioritize binary people over non-binary people.
I would agree with that. I would also say it's designed quite heavily to specifically create an outgroup in women that they could oppress. So I think they wanted the binary so that they could have men at the top and women underneath. So like,
well, when you can counter misogyny online, are you like, oh, I see you're using the old definition of gender that splits people into binaries to reinforce the historical separation between men and women? When you call this woman a, what was it, a fetid, rancid whore, Now you may have been
Yeah,
using
again,
your
like
definitions, but I have my own
look at the
definitions.
language you're using there versus someone saying, I don't think that trans women are women. Like there's a very different use language
Yeah, the
that
difference is
saying
that what you just gave is
fetid whore
worse.
or Aryan master race that want to wipe out the people, rather than someone actually using a definition that is still currently in the dictionary.
As a percentage of the
It's still the
population,
primary definition that most people use.
as the percentage
And
of a
whilst, yeah,
population, wait. As the percentage of a population, how many women kill themselves because they were called a whore relative to how many trans people kill themselves because of lack of social support? Careful.
oh, that's a fair point.
Yeah, like I mean,
That's
if
a
we
fair
want
point.
to appeal to
I'll
utility,
take that one.
yeah, if we want to appeal to
Uh,
utility here, like we know how harmful this behavior is to trans people. And I don't like the idea that like people who misgender trans people are doing so out of some kind of like folksy unawareness of the situation. People who deliberately misgender trans people are transphobic, and it's not just in their language. Like it's pretty clear, you know? Like it's not just like they support and love trans people, but they just use like a biologically essentialist definition. The people who refuse to use trans people's pronouns usually do so because they dislike or are disgusted by trans people. It's never as simple as the utility of the language used. There's always something else. I don't think I've ever met a person online who didn't use trans people's preferred pronouns, but was otherwise like completely on board with everything, you know? There's always something. It's either they're opposed to the idea of transition, which is a kind of medical gatekeeping that has
well,
historically been used to discriminate
yeah,
against trans people, or
if you're
this or
refusing
that.
to use a trans person's pronouns, then that illustrates. I would absolutely agree that illustrates bigotry because you're specifically targeting that person with something as you say that we know can lead to death. So that's different from being asked in general, do you consider trans women to be women? That is a different
the people
claim to
the people who will
I
not
will call Blair White by not she.
the people who will say yes to the first will almost always say yes to the other. I mean, like what person would say, "Yeah, I don't think trans women are women," but then they go on to respect people's like trans women's pronouns in person? Like what like
I
fraction of the
imagine
population
genuinely
are we
that J.K.
referring to?
Rowling would actually fit that. She claims that that is the case anyway. In her
Yeah,
manifesto,
she'd
she
say it
even
to her
claimed that.
friends, of course. That's the same thing racists do. They're like, "Oh, I've got the good ones here." Like, "Oh, trans people in general may be disgusting perverts, but my friends are cool. And black people in general may be X or Y, but here are my black friends." Like, people always make exceptions for their friend group. What I care about is how they treat the group as a block. That's what matters the most. Because even your friends are affected by the political decisions that are ultimately going to come down to how people affect the block, you know? J.K. Rowling's personal affectation for her individual friends means nothing when millions of people read her transphobic tweets and then go on to vote based on those tweets. Like, the individual means nothing.
Exactly. That's again my point that I think her tweets and her advocacy is a big reason why our governments had the ability to try and push through the transphobic laws on bathrooms.
But that's an argument that you should never push for your rights.
In your country that it's still being discussed in several states.
But that's an argument to never advocate for your rights because otherwise prominent bigots might push back and end up affecting policy, which happened again over here. They started a civil war over it over here, actually.
Yes, no, I know.
But there were people like that back then.
Move forward a little bit more peacefully.
If only abolitionists had been more patient, you know? If only they'd been more patient, we wouldn't have needed to go to war with the Confederacy. Like, there were people saying that back then, too. Why do we have to fight a war just because abolitionists are so insistent on using essentialist and hardline language to fight for the freedom of black men? Like, why couldn't it be, you know, why couldn't we work this out?
The Confederacy actually started the war, but yeah, that's a war that definitely I'd agree with being fought from the point of the North.
But it led to blowback.
Yes, it will do. Yes, I'm not saying that there is that you could advocate in such a way that they would never create any blowback. What I'm saying is the way that you're advocating is creating blowback from moderates as opposed to from the people, people like Ben Shapiro. You're never going to get him on side. But I think people like J.K. Rowling, you probably could have done. And if she had
But she came out
gone the other way, and
some...
she's now, you can't get back on side now. Yeah, absolutely, she's come out as a complete lunatic. She decided to repeatedly double down.
But she did it immediately. I mean, her first tweets on the issue were supporting a bigot who was lying publicly about the circumstances of her being removed from the work. And then what was that tweet of hers? Yeah. Like, dress however you please, but force women out of their jobs for stating sex is real. Maya Forstater didn't state sex is real. Trans people believe sex is real. That's not a controversial opinion. I think sex is real. Everyone thinks sex is real. I have it with people's dads all the time. So J.K. Rowling, not only was J.K. Rowling coming out in support of a bigot, J.K. Rowling was doing so using the calculated and refined language of bigots, by using obfuscating language, by using dog whistles, by using half-truths to defend the severity of her actual beliefs. J.K. Rowling started a transphobe. This wasn't like her getting pushed further into transphobia by backlash.
See, I'm not convinced that that's true. We'll both never know. We can't know her intent. We can only infer from her actions. And we both agree that she is now. But as I say, that was my point that I was making, that you don't have a definition for woman.
But I gave a definition for woman. Why do you keep saying that?
Because you haven't been able to provide it yet, have you?
Wait, no, I have.
You didn't. You said definition. A woman is someone that identifies as a woman. That's like saying an aardvark is an aardvark. That's not a definition. You can't define something by saying it is the thing.
You still don't seem to understand what definitions are. Definitions are something we construct for utility's sake. A definition can be self-referential if it needs to be, if that provides the most utility. Now, I think that gender is a largely destructive concept, so eventually I want it gone. But in the meantime, the least destructive definition of gender seems to be that, one of self-identification. There is no such thing as, like, in a purely, like, epistemological sense, there's no such thing as a definition that isn't a correct definition. We create the definitions we want. I just think that the one that I'm using, even if it's self-referential, is less destructive than the one that other people use. You keep saying I don't have a definition. That's categorically untrue. Yeah. What I have is an incoherent definition.
Provide one that isn't self-referential, and I'll believe that you have one.
That's not how a definition can be self-referential.
It can't.
Why? Can you prove that to me, please?
Can you find an example of something that we both agree was the valid definition of something?
Sure.
Or from a dictionary?
No,
entirely self-referential.
Sure. Can you provide a definition for a chair which includes all chairs, but doesn't include anything which isn't a chair? That's what a definition is, after all. It concisely and explicitly describes something, a concept, a thing, but it doesn't describe other things. It just describes that. So can you describe a chair?
I would just grab the nearest dictionary and read whatever that is. I imagine that wouldn't beat your new... I haven't got a dictionary to hand. I'm sure you can Google it.
Sure. Hold on.
I'd be worried about Googling the definition without and potentially hanging up on you or doing something silly.
Okay, hold on. A separate seat for one person, typically with a back and 4 legs. That's the definition.
There you go.
So that's not particularly convincing. Typically with a back and 4 legs. What does that mean? A separate seat for one person? I've seen seats for 2. What does it mean by separate?
It's not self-referential, though, is it? Like,
wait, hold on. You need to define chair completely. I'm not satisfied by a definition of a chair. Why do I need to? Because otherwise it's not a proper definition. A separate seat for one person, typically with a back and 4 legs. Is a saddle a seat? Is a horse unsaddled a seat? It doesn't say anything about this being a non-biological seat.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't. So can you define chair for me?
Again, I'm going to point at that dictionary definition and say that's good enough. That's actually got into a dictionary.
This doesn't describe all chairs.
So?
Clearly there is a truth to chairs that is not being encompassed by the language we're being shown here. This is an incomplete definition.
You're just trying to argue around the point now.
Are you saying that
Because
something
you know
can be
that
a
you don't have a
definition
definition
without
you're now
actually
just trying to
defining something?
change the goalpost on what a definition means
This isn't a
to
goalpost
so
moving.
high that it can't be met by anything ever,
No,
because you can never define
this isn't.
anything to that level.
This isn't a goalpost moving. It's possible to define things in ways that are explicit and coherent and also completely comprehensive. But I really want to know what a chair is. See, the problem with this...
I disagree.
You
Because
disagree that I
I'll
want to know
go
what a chair
again
is.
back to the dictionary.
Uh-huh.
So you're saying all dictionaries are wrong.
No, no.
And
Don't
that's your
straw man
gotcha.
me.
That is not a straw man.
I'm
You've
not
literally
saying
said
all
that the dictionary
dictionaries.
definition of chair is not a good enough definition. And you read
When did I
basically
say
any
all
definition,
dictionaries
dictionary, it's
are
going to
wrong?
be. Because basically all dictionaries work the same way that dictionary definition
So
works.
I'm trying to illustrate a point to you, okay? The point is, there is no definition of chair. You can try as long as you want, for as hard as you want. You will never come up with a definition of chair that describes the totality of what human beings colloquially understand to be chairs. The definition is inadequate. It's like Plato's cave. The definition is a shadow on the wall, where the Platonic chair is somewhere floating off in real space. The definition does not actually tell us...
nearly anything.
Right. Well, that's the thing. You seem to be under the impression that a definition has to be this holistically consistent...
No, it just has to not be self-referential.
Can you find a rule in that for me?
What do you mean?
Can you find a rule in that for me? Like can you explain why?
A
You
law
just seem to be very
that someone's
confident.
passed.
Yeah, can you explain why? Also, what if I just said that a woman isn't a person who identifies as a woman? What if I simply said a woman is a label that people may self-ascribe to in order to cultivate a certain kind of social response? There. Now it's not
that would be a much better definition.
Oh, sure. Then same. I mean, same essential affect, but sure.